Good morning friends, you are most welcome to Civil Affairs channel. Today we are going to discuss Social Anthropology by MAAN IGNOU. Here we will discuss Comparative Ethnography MANE003 and our topic is theoretical part of which the ethnography Death in Banaras is an example. This book is an example of the interpretive approach in anthropology. Perry is concerned with finding out the meaning of rituals and how the business of death is organized in Banaras. Description of the ethnography. This ethnography is the study of death rituals as performed in the city of cosmogony, Banaras. Intellectual context. As pointed out earlier, this book is a fine example of the interpretive approach. Among the social phenomena, death is one that has not been studied to the extent it should be, and from that perspective, it is a significant contribution. Fieldwork. The author of this work has spent a long time in the city of Banaras working on cross-section of populations, beginning with a study of a group of renouncers known as Aghori. The chapters comprising this work were presented as Lewis Henry Morgan Memorial Lectures. Analysis of data as a place to die, to dispose of the physical remains of the deceased, and to perform the rites which ensure that the departed attains a good state after death. The North Indian city of Banaras attracts pilgrims and mourners from all over the Hindu world. This book is primarily about the priest and other kinds of sacred specialists who serve them, about the way in which they organize their business, and about their representations of death and understanding of the rituals over which they preside. Death and the city through divine eyes. This deals with Banaras' association with death and its transcendence. This is looked from a religious perspective that Lord Vishnu created the cosmos sky by performing aesthetic austerities at what is now the city's main cremation ground. Kashi is known as the Great Cremation Ground because it is there that the five great elements which compose the world arrive as corpses. The gulf which divides the city from profane space is again underlined by the maxim that it stands apart from the three loks, the 14 bhuvans, and the 9 khands. Kashi constitutes the tenth khand. But if Kashi is the cosmos, it is also symbolically identified with the human body. The five ghats which are visited in the course of the Pancha Tirtha pilgrimage are sometimes explicitly equated with the five elements which the body is composed. Since cremation is a sacrifice regenerating the cosmos, and since funeral pyres burn without interruption throughout the day and night at Manikarnika Ghat, creation is here continually replayed. As a result, it is always the Satya Yuga in Kashi, the beginning of time when the world was new. That it is because of the city's sacredness that people come there to die and be cremated is an obvious truism. What is less obvious perhaps is that the ideology itself implies that Kashi is sacred precisely because they come for this purpose, for it is death and cremation that keep the city at the navel of the universe set outside space and time. It is no accident then that the scene of cosmogony is also the site of unceasing cremation, or that the especially important corpse should be burned on that very spot where Vishnu sat for 50,000 years allied with the fire of the austerities by which he created the world. A profane perspective, with its reputation for orthodox Brahminical Hinduism and its ancient tradition of Sanskritic learning. It is the Brahmins who set the dominant religious tone of the city. Despite its relatively small population, Banaras now supports three universities, each of which prides itself on strength in Sanskrit studies and or Hindu philosophy, as well as a host of pathshalas, traditional schools devoted to transmitting under the tutelage of the Brahmin Guru a knowledge of the sacred scriptures and an ability to recite the Vedic mantras. At the level of popular religion, there is at least a degree of syncretism. Many lower caste Hindus go as supplicants to the shrine of the Muslim martyr Bahadur Shaheed for the solution of the problems caused by the malevolent ghost of those who have died a bad death. Many lower caste Muslims visit the Samadhi tomb of a Hindu Aghori ascetic for the cure of barrenness. The pilgrims, however, have continued to arrive in ever increasing numbers, though it is likely that a smaller proportion of them than formerly belonged to the highest and the most affluent sections of the society, and that the index linked value of the average priestly donation has declined, but this is almost certainly made up for by volume and turnover. More and more pilgrims come by rail and bus on package tours of a number of sacred centers, and fewer of them stay in Banaras for more than a couple of days. Perhaps a majority are there only for a few hours. Many are the first members of their family or village to have visited the city and do not there have a hereditary panda. Increasing number of corpses are also brought to the city for their last sacrifice, and more people of rank aspire to cremate them on the footstep of the Vishnu. Some of those outsiders who have cremated their corpse in Banaras stay on to perform the mortuary rituals of the first 12 days, and some who have cremated elsewhere come to the city to perform these rites. At certain seasons, large numbers of villagers from the surrounding countryside, accompanied by their exorcist, visit the sacred tank of Pishach Mochan to lay the spirits of the malevolent dead to rest. During Pitri Paksh, the fortnight of the ancestors, tens of thousands of pilgrims stop at Kashi to offer rice balls to their ancestors at Pishach Mochan or on the ghats before completing their pilgrimage to Gaya, where they perform rites for their final liberation. In one way or another, then death in Banaras is an extremely big business. Death as a living, shares and chicanery. chicanery. This chapter describes the division of mortuary labor between various groups of occupational specialists who earn a living in and around the burning ghats, a division of labor which is closely constrained by the ideology of caste. One type of caste specialist is, for example, required to handle the physical remains of the deceased, another to deal with his marginal and malevolent ghost before its incorporation as an ancestor, while a third type of specialist presides over rituals addressed to the essentially benevolent ancestor. At death and at death the soul becomes a disembodied ghost or pret, a hungry and malevolent state dangerous to the survivors. On the 12th day after death, a rite is performed which enables the deceased to rejoin his ancestors and become an ancestor himself. The Mahabrahman funeral priest presides over the ritual addressed to the ghost during the first 11 days after death and accepts on behalf of the ghost the gift intended to it. A further set of gifts is made in the name of newly incorporated ancestor on the 12th day, and these are accepted by the deceased's hereditary household priest Kul Purohit. In the case of outsiders who have stayed in Banaras to perform the mortuary rituals, the Brahman specialist stands in for the soul he serves, the impure funeral priest for the ghost, the relatively pure pilgrimage priest for the ancestor. Mahabrahman means the great Brahman. The caste is alternatively known as Mahapatra, great vessels. An actor is a Patra, a vessel for the qualities of the character he plays. In the drama of death, the funeral priest is the vessel for the rancorous greed of the ghost, worshipped as the deceased, worshipped as the deceased. He is dressed in dead man's clothes, is made to wear his spectacles or clutch his walking stick and his favorite foods is fed his favorite foods. If the deceased were a woman, a female Mahabrahman is worshipped and presented with women's clothing, cosmetics and jewelry at a rite which marks the end of the period of the most intense pollution. The chief mourner and then the other male mourners are tonsured by the barber, but before even the chief mourner, the Mahabrahman should be shaved, as the Pret itself were the one most deeply polluted by the death. Though unequivocally Brahman, Mahabrahmans are Pret Brahmans, Ghost Brahmans, who are in many contexts treated much like untouchables and are described as achut, not to be touched. No fastidious person or clean caste will dine with them. In theory, they should live outside the village and to the south of it, that is, in the direction of death. Writing of the Banaras rural hinterland in the 1940s, Opler and Singh report they may not even enter the village to beg. With regard to such matters as the consumption of meat and alcohol and the incidence of widow remarriage and breaches of caste endogamy, they could not be described as paragons of Brahminical orthodoxy, but nor could many of the other Brahman communities who earn a living on ghats. The Mahabrahmans' relative degradation is rather a consequence of the fact that they participate in the death pollution which afflicts their patrons. Since they have many judgments, they are, as it were, in a permanent state of impurity. Not only impure, the Mahabrahman is also highly inauspicious, although physical contact with a sweeper woman would be unambiguously polluting. It is auspicious to see her face as one is embarking on a new enterprise. By contrast, it is at any time inauspicious to set eyes on a Mahabrahman, and if you chance to see one first thing in the morning, then somebody in your house may die. You should not even utter his name in the morning, nor may a Mahabrahman come to your nor may a Mahabrahman come to your door. Nobody, as the proverb has it, should have the misfortune that a Mahabrahman cross his threshold. He is somebody to be kept at bay, somebody to whom, in the custom of certain localities, to throw stones as he departs at the end of the mortuary rituals, lest he be tempted to return. Salt should not be put in the food he is served, for salt sets a relationship with the eater and no relationship should be acknowledged with the ghost or pret. The Mahabrahman is regarded with a mixture of fear and contempt. He is regarded with a gaze of hate. He drashti. He drashti is known as bitter one. Katu is said to have no lustre, kanti, on his face, and the stereotype contrasts his fabulous wealth with the squalor of his demeanor and lifestyle. He is treated with less respect and consideration than the meanest untouchable. One Mahabrahman friend resentfully recalls his teacher's taunts that he should leave school to hang up water pot dwellings for the ghost. Another tells of the Khatri woman throwing away all the chilies drying on her roof when he went to retrieve the kite which had landed on it. Mahabrahman weddings and other life cycle rituals are presided over by a pure Brahman. One Mahabrahman sells pan, the betel nut which many Banarsis chew addictively in a quarter of the city where many people must be aware of his caste, while another runs a tea shop on the main road which passes through his suburban village. The rites of the first 11 days after death are conducted on the ghats or on the bank of some sacred tank. The Mahabrahman who officiates at these rites will only come to the house of his Jajman patron if he is summoned on the day of the cremation to preside over the offering of 5 rice balls made between the door of the house and the funeral pyre. On the following day, he directs the hanging of the water pot, which serves as the home for the prayed in the branches of the sacred people, Ficus religiosa, Ficus religiosa people tree, and he subsequently accompanies the Jajman there on daily expeditions to offer ware and a lighted lamp. He also conducts the offering of 1 rice ball each day, each of which creates a different parts of a new body for the deceased. This body is completed on the 10th day. On the 11th day, it is fed and the preth is now ready to become an ancestor. The Mahabrahman's duty are at the end. He is worshipped, fed, given gifts, and departs having masked the water pot dwelling of the preth. If cremation is carried out in Panchak, a block of 5 consecutive lunar mansions, nakshatras, during which it is particularly inauspicious to burn a body, the Mahabrahman presides over the rite of pacifying the Panchak Shanti. In case of untimely death, he superintends on the 11th day the additional rite of Narayani Bali, which has the object of preventing the embittered soul from remaining in praise from Yoni, and he also performs Putala Vidhan, at which an elaborate effigy of deceased is constructed and then cremated for those whose corpses were either lost or immersed in the Gangas or Ganges. Bad death generally represents good income for the funeral priest. The inventory constitutes the maximum elaboration of the Mahabrahman's duty. In most cases, there is no question of Panchak Shanti, Narayani Bali, and Putala Vidhan of the standard repertoire. repertoire the Mahabrahman would only expect to perform the full complement for an important Jajman from whom he expects a munificent offering. For the majority, his services are considerably attenuated and often amount to no more than attending the rituals of the 10th and 11th days, scrambling them through which much surreptitious editing when the financial pickings look slim and accepting the gifts with more or less bad grace. The Mahabrahman's presence is, however, essential. He confers salvation and allows the soul to swim across to the other world. For the successful conclusion of the rites, he must be satisfied with the gifts offered. His belly must be full, though on such occasions he is seemingly insatiable. Without his blessings, the deceased will remain in the limbo of praethood to plague his family with misfortune and further bereavement. With it, their descent line can prosper and increase. His curse is greatly feared, a fact which the Mahabrahman often exploits with the veiled threats designed to encourage a tight-fisted judgment to loosen his purse string. A separate caste, the Mahabappas, a funeral is a funeral priest to the funeral priest. A separate caste, the Mahabappas, is funeral priest to the funeral priest. Mahabappa settlements are small and scattered, and each serves the Mahabrahman communities of a considerable area. No matter on which ghat they are cremated or immersed, the Mahabrahman who has pari his turn in the rota on the day on which the corpse is brought to the ghat has the exclusive right to accept all gifts which will subsequently be made in the name of the ghost, the most valuable of which are generally offered at the rituals of the 10th or 11th day. In practice, the city Mahabrahmans are only likely to hear about those who cremate in Banaras or whose ashes are brought for immersion. The residue represents the least promising donors. In the past, 4 settlements of village funeral priests were appointed by the city Mahabrahmans to watch over their rites and inform them of any death in the vicinity. Today, it is these local representatives who appropriate a large proportion of the offerings made by village judgment of the poorer sort. Judgment from outside the radius of the punch do not fall within the scope of the Banaras funeral priest unless they stay in the city to perform the 10th and 11th day rituals, in which event they are claimed by the pari holder. But even when this is not the case, he may still derive some income from them by presiding over the offerings made at the ghat on the day of cremation. In total, the pari owner may acquire 10 or 12 jajman who will offer him sajjadan 10 or 11 days after or later, and earn up to 150 rupees from offerings made at the pyre. The mechanics of the system are such that occasionally a pari holder miscalculates or more likely forgets to show up on the ghat on the day of his pari, though he will usually have realized his error by the time of crucial 10 or 11 day rituals. In such a eventuality, Bihari Maharaj, the richest and most powerful pari holder whose servants remain on Manikarnika Ghat 24 hours a day, takes charges of all judgment, and when the rightful owner eventually turns up, reimburses him with a proportion of the takings. In the course of the year, there are one or more paris which remain regularly unclaimed, and for all intents and purpose Bihari has made these his own. Within the Mahabrahman community, pari rights are very unevenly distributed. Bihari Maharaj has rights to some 75 days a year, while his half brother and another man between them accounts for a further 55 days. In other words, a third of the year is owned by just 3 individuals. In both Panch and Pari, the right holders needs the help of several semi-permanent Karinda servants in order to attend to all his judgment and to muster a suitably imposing backing at the time of negotiating the offerings. About 20 Mahabrahmans work more or less regularly as Karindas, most of them for several different employers. On the day of Pari, one of them will remain throughout the 24s at Harish Chandra Ghat and 2 or 3 at Manikarnika, where they collect information about prospective judgment and preside over offerings at the pyre. The income from Panch and Pari is quite unpredictable. The profession, people say, is dependent on the sky. Akash Vritti, several turns running may yield only the most impoverished judgment, but there is always a change. There is always a chance that once in a while the Pari holder may enjoy the windfall of the Maharaj or a Marwadi business. Other variants of Pari, the untouchable dome funeral attendants, labor at the Pyres under a similarly infamous reputation for rapacity. The cremation ground domes, who distinguish themselves as Gotakhor diver or driver, Gotakhor domes, insist that they are an entirely separate subcaste from the sweeper domes of Banaras and other North Indian cities and from the basket maker domes of the rural areas. They numbered around 670 and mainly reside in two neighborhoods in the vicinity of the two burning ghats. The family barber has already cropped up in association with the priest. Funeral priest, he acts as a general factotum throughout the period of mourning and would normally accompany the funeral procession to the cremation ground where he tonsure the chief mourner, sometimes all sons of the deceased and sometimes the corpse itself. An experienced barber will have come to the ghat before, may find himself directing many of the proceedings, and is usually expected to negotiate with the wood seller, who pays him commission of 1 anna in the rupee, and with the shops which sells shrouds and other mortuary goods. Around 700 small crafts are licensed to work the riverfront. Most are owned and manned by Mallah, a caste of fishermen or boatmen. Each boat may take passengers only from its own ghat, though the right of though the right to fish anywhere on the river is unrestricted. An important source of subsidiary earnings on several ghats is the right to dredge in the river mud for coins thrown into the Ganges by the pious pilgrims as Gupta Dan, a secret and particularly meritorious gift. The way in which passengers are allocated between the various right holders of a single ghat is variable. Desha Deshashvamed 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 is the most popular bathing ghat in the city. Deshashvamad. The boatmen all sit together on the wooden platform at the bottom of the long flight of stone steps that leads down to the river. The boatmen all sit together on the wooden platform at the bottom of a long flight of stone steps that leads down to the river. As any potential passenger reaches the top of the steps, one of the boatmen will stake a claim by calling out, "The one with the spectacles, the bell-bottom Pant the red monkey Englishman, whoever claimed the passenger takes him." At Manikarnika Ghat, there are 6 established shops which specialize in the sale of what are collectively called the goods of the skull-bearing Kapal Kriya Saman. These consist of shrouds, various offerings to the pyre, and the big water pot Gagra, which the chief mourner throws over his left shoulder at the end of cremation to cool the pyre. These shops also sell stone slabs for weighting down corpse emerged in river. 40 or 50 years ago, a single individual had a monopoly on this business, which he reportedly enforced by smashing pots brought by the mourners from elsewhere. By contrast with the Kapal Kriya trade, the wood businessman at Manikarnika is today a relatively free market. Up until about 1910, however, a single shop owned and managed by the powerful Rajput family had a complete monopoly over all wood sold on the Ghat. This shop still exists and remains the exclusive supplier of wood to the domes when they negotiate an all-in price, which includes the cost of materials. The reason is that the arcaded structure where the domes sit to negotiate their tax, where they eat and store bamboo from the bears, is under the is under this Rajput family's control, and the doms use it only on their sufferance. The same shop is also the sole supplier of the 5 mounds of wood which the municipal council allows for the cremation of indigenous corpses. Pandagiri, the profession of pilgrimage priest. As we have seen, many mourners bring the ashes of a deceased kinspersons to Banaras to immerse in the Ganges, while the vast majority of pilgrims perform offerings to their ancestors during the course of their visit. It is in principle the pilgrimage priest, the Panda or Tirth Purohit, who arranges and may even preside over these rituals. In the case of those outsiders who remain in or come to the city to perform the post cremation mortuary rites, it is he who stands in for, embodies, and receives gifts in the name of newly incorporated ancestors at the rituals of the 12th day. The Panda puts the pilgrims up in his own house or in one of the numerous pilgrims' hostels, arranges their visits to the shops, temples, and other sacred sites, and for the rituals they perform, and accepts the gifts associated with them. He is, he says, a contractor of religion, dharma ka thekedar, a phrase which nicely captures his role as a general purpose fixer for both this and other worldly comforts of his clients. The last sacrifice, the expression of grief. At death, it is man who give birth. In nearly all communities, women are regarded as too faint hearted to accompany the corpse to the burning ghats, and it is exclusively men who assist cremation. Even in the absence of the sun, a man serves as Dagia, the one who gives fire, and performs the subsequent rites. What then is the role of women? The short answer is to grieve. The corpses are meticulously washed by women, wrap it in a white shroud, and lay out on the bed with 37 other brightly colored shrouds draped over it. When it is moved to one side for its bath, and when it is lifted into the bed, the women burst out into the chorus of wails and have to be cajoled by men to relinquish it. More garlands and balloons are added to their bier. A golden sari is tied to a long bamboo pole, a red sari to another. These are to serve as standards which would lead to the funeral procession. A bead is rubbed on the face of the corpse. It is time to move, but the women who surround the bed become reluctant to make a way for the pallbearers. As they shoulder it, the women cry out in anguish. The two bands play different tunes. The young boys also dance frigidly and the most of the men raised a triumphant cry of Har Har Mahadev, a greeting appropriate to Lord Shiva. The women are allowed to accompany the procession only a short way. The good and bad death. In this case, the good and bad death. A good death occurs at the right time and at the right place, ideally in Banaras on the banks of Ganges, with the lower limbs in the water. Failing Banaras or some other places of pilgrimage, one should die at home on purified ground and in open air and not on a bed or under a roof. Even in Banaras there are good and the bad times to go. Death in Uttarayan, the 6 months of the year that begin with the winter solstice, Makar Sanskriti, Makar Sankranti, that is Makar Sankranti, is propitious for this is the day, time of the gods. Makar Sankranti is propitious for this is the day time of the gods during Dakshinayan. The other 6 months they spend much of their time asleep and do not therefore take much notice of human affairs, but the ancestors are now wide awake, so Dakshinayan is auspicious for the performance of Shraddha rituals addressed to them, and this is during this period that Pitru Paksh, the fortnight of ancestors, is celebrated. A bad death is one, then in which the deceased has revealed no intention of sacrificing his body. Example, the victim of violence or accident, or of renouncing its desires. Example, suicide. Alternatively, it is that of a person whose body does not constitute a fit sacrificial object. Ghost into ancestors. In Banaras, the post cremation mortuary rites describe the way to convert the marginal Pret ghost into an ancestral Pitra and to facilitate the arduous journey of the deceased to the abode of the ancestors Pitralok, where he arrives on the anniversary of his death. Rites addressed to the ghost are presided over by the Mahabrahman funeral priest, those addressed to the ancestors by the deceased hereditary household or pilgrimage priest. In Banaras, both sets of rituals are collectively known as Shraddh. Etymologically, Shraddh is closely related to Shraddh or faith. Shraddh being popularly defined as that which is offered to the ancestors with faith. The offerings are of the two kinds. The first in Pindadan, the gifts of Pind, balls of rice, barley, flour, or khoa, a thick paste made by boiling milk. The second kind of offerings is mediated by the Brahmins who are fed and offered gifts. Offered gifts. Panna Ojha. Those who die a good death are cremated. Panna Ojha is a man of commanding presence in his mid 60s. Despite his ochre renouncer's robe, Panna is a householder. By caste a potter, he lives in a village some 5 or 6 miles from the center of the city. Most of his patients see him on the veranda veranda of his house, on one side of which is a raised platform which contains a shrine of the goddess Durga or Sitala and a square sacrificial fire pit into the ash of which several ascetics, tongues and tridents are stuck. Let's repeat this. Most most of his patients see him on the veranda of his house, on the side of which is raised platform which contains a shrine of the goddess Durga in Sitala and a square sacrificial fire pit into the ash of which several ascetics, tongues, and tridents are stuck. During his consultations, Panna sits imposingly on the platform with his patients, generally in family groups, at his feet below him. His seasons, his sessions begin with an elaborate act of worship for his tutelary deities and a lengthy reading from various sacred texts. Conclusion: the book provides an account of the association of the city of Banaras with death rituals. It also gives a brief sketch of what is known about the history as a pilgrimage center and as a place to die and dispose of the physical remains of the death. How does the ethnography advance our understanding? Generally, in the study of death, the focus has been on rituals. By contrast, Parry's work is a thick description of what is called the business of death. In addition to symbolic analysis of rituals, their meaning and purpose, the work provides a detailed understanding of the ritual technicians, so to say, who are associated with the performance of death rituals. From the study of microcosm, the Manikarnika Ghat, Parry moves on the understanding of Banaras as the city of cosmogony. Summary part: the study of religions can be approached in many ways and can present a number of different kinds of problems for social anthropologists, or for some of them. One major problem is that of the social functions of religion. How does religion contribute to the existence of society as an ordered and continuing system of relationship amongst human beings? In the first monograph on the Cooks of the South India, the author has presented that religion is a binding force amongst individuals. The scientific problem is how religion does this, how, in other words, its functions. Parry's work focuses on the priests and other sacred specialists who serve the enormous number of mourners and pilgrims who are drawn to Banaras from throughout the Hindu world. A clear and coherent descriptive analysis of the ritual performed by these specialists and their ideas concerning death and of ways in which they organize their business. The book is at once a clear analysis of the rituals concerning death. Thank you very much.